Hey everyone. Sorry I was off camera. Welcome to the Other Side podcast. It's another Monday. You're here with me, and I'm really excited. My name is Janelle Villiers, and I'm your host of the Other Side podcast, where I love to talk about all things for first time authors or people who are authors out there and you want to just get better at your craft. As well as being on this mental health journey that many of us are on. It is something that let me get rid of that. Actually, that's the topic we're going to be talking about. Hello again. Sorry, a lot of technical difficulties today, but I'm really excited to be with you today because we're actually going to be talking about another book topic, and you may have seen this already as I popped it up. But that is, how do you choose which narrative to use? And for those of you that are authors out there, maybe you've gone back and forth between using first person, which is saying I and we, and changing that up to the third person where she did this, he did that, and that type of a thing. And I get it. It can be confusing. You're not really sure exactly which narrative to use as you start off. And so I really wanted to get into that because there is, I do think that you can potentially choose a narrative that doesn't necessarily make it bad, but just is the poor choice of the two, depending on what type of book you are writing. So let's get into it. I have a couple of notes, as you guys know, I always do. So I want to make sure that I give you guys all the value that you can get in one sitting. So first I wanted to talk about the biggest narratives mistakes that first-time authors make. So the first is the point of view inconsistency. So that's when you shift between this like omniscient third person and then hopping between the third party, but you're like one of the characters. So like the thoughts and then the scenes. So you go from omniscient to thoughts and then scenes. And so that can just create confusion unnecessarily for the readers. And so let's stay away from that. The second big mistake that a lot of times first-time authors make in terms of narratives is choosing based on trends, not necessarily what the story needs. So if you select first person present tense because it's popular, but not because it serves the story, that's really not going to help you. So following genre conventions without understanding their purpose can really lead you into that, right? Where you're just like choosing trends. And then when that happens, you end up like forcing a narrative style that doesn't necessarily match your natural voice. And then your reading feels stilted and doesn't flow. And readers can sense that when they start reading your book. So you want to base the narrative based on what you need and what helps with the purpose of what you're writing. The third biggest mistake is underestimating technical challenges. So first person requires deep character development and a very distinctive voice, where when you have multiple points of view, right, this demands character differentiation, right? So this particular character thinks like this, speaks like this, that kind of a thing. And present tense really requires maintaining that tension without relying on anticipation. So you're really just like being very clear and being very distinctive with the different characters. And your primary character who's talking in first character, there's a lot of deep development. You're understanding how they think because you're understanding their motivations and how they make the decisions that they make and all of that. That's why it's in the first person. P.S. That's also a lot of the times why first person is best for memoir-like books. I'm going to leave it at that for now. So those are the three mistakes. Now I want to talk about how to match your narrative choice to your specific story. So I was just hinting at this, right? So number one, story-driven decision framework. So when you have intimate characters, they typically benefit from first person. So complex plots with multiple threads may need third person, whereas stories about secrets, typically works well with basically an unreliable first person, right? So if there are secrets, you're reading from the first person, but they just can't like pick up on all the different things that are going on. Or you can use a limited third person where they seem omniscient, but maybe the third person misses a couple of things, right? So intimate character-driven stories, especially if it's memoir, think first person. Complex plots with multiple threads, multiple people, you may want to lean into third person. Then finally, stories with secrets, you're going to be an unreliable first person or a very limited third person. Okay, let's talk about character proximity assessment. So determine how close the reader should feel to your protagonist. Consider which character has the most compelling perspective. And then ask whether the reader intimacy or objective distance better serves your theme. So how close? This is a real question. Like, how close do you want the readers to feel? Do you want them to really feel like they're getting to know you as a person, aka memoir? Again, that's going to serve you as first person. But sometimes telling the story from a different person's perspective actually creates a whole different story and a whole different viewpoint that is important for the readers to understand. And in that case, then you wouldn't maybe talk in third person in order to make that a possibility, because if you kept it in first, you wouldn't be able to do that. And then the third thing to check in on is the information control that you may be thinking about. So the first person limits readers to one perspective, but it creates that intimacy that you want, right, with the first person character, right? So that maybe is really helpful. So you're limited to perspective, but they're getting really, really close with that main character. The third person is a limited, controlled release of information, right? So when you're in a third person, it's like you can really control how fast or how slow the information eventually gets to the readers. And then when you're this like omniscient third person, you can provide flexibility, but requires a very confident narrative to handle it. So what I mean by confident is you are very clear because you're everywhere and you can know everything. You're very confident in what you share and what you don't because there's intentionality behind everything. So just thinking about like how much control you want over the different perspectives that you want the readers to have can also be an indication as to what type of narrative or what voice choice you're going to be using. All right, so now let's talk about simple tests to determine your ideal point of view and tense. So here's one test. You can do the rewrite test. So rewrite your opening scene in multiple points of views and tenses. Read each version aloud. Believe me, reading out loud makes a huge difference. So definitely want to read it out loud and then note which feels more natural. And then ask test readers which version makes them want to continue reading. This is really, really helpful. So just rewrite it in many different tenses and points of views. Then you can also do the character access evaluation. So list key information readers need throughout the story, and then determine which characters would realistically have access to that information and which ones wouldn't. And then choose the point of view that provides necessary access without making it like a forced situation. So this can kind of lead to your narrative decision as well, based on how much access to the information does each of the characters have? And then that will help you decide the narrative and or the tense even. And then the emotional impact assessment. So you can identify the primary emotions that you want the reader to experience throughout different parts of the story, and maybe even as a whole. And then write a highly emotional scene from different points of views and tenses. And then compare which version creates the strongest reader connection or evokes the most strongest reader emotion, right? Depending on the narrative and the tense, or the point of view and the tense. So those are three different like assessment tools or quizzes or tests that you can do to help you narrow down which narrative you want to use and the tense. Okay, so here are some real examples of successful and one possibly not so successful narrative choice. So think of the Hunger Games, right? And the Hunger Games is written in first person present tense. So you might be thinking, okay, so why did it work? It works because it creates immediacy and urgency in life or death situations. Key. It also allows the reader to discover dystopian worlds alongside Katniss. So you're like, it's being revealed to you at the same time as being revealed to her. And the present tense enhances the unpredictability of the games because you don't know, right? You only have her perspective, nobody else's. That's how you can control that. But you get intimately connected with her. So that's why it works really well. Let's talk about another one. Some of you might be familiar with The Night Circus. So if you are familiar with that, it's written in third person present. And the reason why it works is because present tense creates a dreamlike quality matching the magical setting that the author created. And so multiple points of views allow exploration of different aspects of the circus. And then when you alternate the time, when the author was alternating the timelines, this actually helped to change the perspective as well as build mystery effectively. So this is really, really helpful. A very successful narrative choice for this particular book. Okay, and so one that didn't quite hit the mark personally, that's just my point of view, is The Heart-Shaped Box. This is by Joe Hill. It's written in the third person, and it's limited. So it's limited third person. And so the reason why it's a little bit of a struggle is because the story is very personal. These personal haunting losses and of intimacy. It's these losses that are really personal to the main character, but it's all written in third person. So it's really weird. It's kind of like putting distance between you, the reader, and like what's happening to the character that the reader is reading about. But that distance doesn't help when it's such a really emotional thing that's happening for the main character. And so the protagonist's rock star background and inner trauma would have benefited from this more of a first person voice, because then we'd know exactly their perspective. We'd have a better understanding and a connection to what's going on for that main character. And so the critical emotional resonance is really just kind of diminished, just lessened by this distance third party that the third party creates. So, or excuse me, third person creates. So I think it would have been better if it would have been done in first person. I mean, is it horrendous? No, but I think it just kind of fell a little flat, and people would have been more connected had it been written in the first person. But that's just my personal opinion and my take. So, I always like to give a wrap up. If you've been getting value from this, please put a V in the chat. I always like to shout you out if you are. I read all of the comments, so please go ahead and comment. Let me know if you've made any of these mistakes so far. So the three biggest mistakes, narrative mistakes that first-time authors makes is the point of view inconsistency. Totally confuses the reader. 2, choosing based on trends, not on what the story actually needs. And 3, underestimating the technical challenges that writing in the different tenses can make, or excuse me, different points of view can be challenging. And so people underestimate how that can end up causing problems as they're writing. Okay, so the next thing we talked about is how to match your narrative choice to your specific story. So if it's story driven, if you're using the way that the story is written in order to make your decision, you're looking for intimacy with the main character as being the number one reason why you go into first choice. If there's a complex plot, then maybe it needs multiple perspectives. And so then that you would be thinking, okay, maybe third person. And then anything that's character, any assessment that you can use to decide, you can decide whether to use a particular point of view based on character proximity. So determine how close you want your readers to feel to the main character, essentially. And also, you may want to consider which characters have access to information during certain points that are really important. That could also help you decide on which point of view to use. And then another strategy that you can use to try to figure out which narrative to use is figuring out the control that you have over information that gets revealed to the readers. So remember, if you're doing first person, it's going to be super limited information that gets put to the readers because it's only from the first person perspective. However, if it's in the third person, you can slowly release different information in the way that you want. You have more control over how much information they get. So that can be really helpful. Okay, so here are some simple tests that you can do to determine the point of view and the tense. You do the rewrite test. So basically you're just rewriting a particular scene in all the different tenses, all the different points of view. And then you read it or ask other people to help you out with that. The second test that you can do is the character access test. So list key information that readers need throughout the story and then figure out which character would be the one who needs to share that information. And then finally, the emotional impact test. And so identify the primary emotions you want the readers to experience. And then that will certainly help you with the point of view and the tense, because you can write a particularly highly emotional scene in all the different tenses and all the different points of view, and then figure out which one sounds the most natural. Okay, and then we just went over some real life examples of success and not so much successes. And it included the Hunger Games, which was in the first person, worked really, really well. First person present. We talked about the Night Circus, which was in third person present. And then we also talked about Heart Shaped Box, which was in third person limited, which didn't hit the mark so well. So if this has been really helpful for you, please let me know in the comments. Again, put a V, let me know it created a lot of value. Please don't forget to come back next week. If you found this valuable, the easiest thing that you can do, and it's for free, all you got to do is hit the subscribe button, hit the like to this video, the notification bell so you don't miss another episode. I can't wait to see you guys next week. Have a great night.